Hello there, darlings. Jinhsi is right around the corner, and as promised, I have a full build and teams guide for her. I will not be going into details about how to play her, as I've already covered her kit before, so go check out that video first if you need to. But let's get started with the build. As Jinhsi is a Spectre damage dealer, it should come as no surprise that the Spectre or Celestial Light set is the best in slot. It gives 30% Spectre damage upon intro, so it is extremely easy to use and trigger. There are no alternatives here. Using something like the attack set is a big 12% damage loss, and that's not even counting that you won't be able to use Jue as your equipped Echo. Stick to the 5-piece Celestial Light set for Jinhsi. Speaking of the equipped Echo, Jue is tailor-made for use with Jinhsi. It is a lot of damage up front while also buffing her skill. You really want to farm Jue when it becomes available alongside Jinhsi. You can use the Morning Aches as a stopgap if you wish. Let's talk about main stat configurations. For the forecast, you want either crit rate or crit damage, whichever one brings you closer to a 1:2 ratio. If you're unaware of what a 1:2 ratio is, basically your crit rate should ideally be half your crit damage. Though keep in mind that the crit damage value shown on the character info page is not to be used directly. You must detect 100% from the crit damage value first before comparing. So if your crit damage on screen says 200%, you're gonna count it as 100%. So a 1:2 ratio for 200% crit damage would be 50% crit rate and 200% crit damage. Generally, if you're pulling Jinhsi's signature weapon, which has crit rate, you'll likely find crit damage main stat on the forecast Echo to be most effective. But a crit rate may work just fine depending on how your substats end up rolling. There's no one size fits all. Don't fret too much over it though, because as long as you're not going beyond 100% crit rate, the choice between crit rate and crit damage main stat really does not matter much. For the 3-cost Echoes, you want either double Spectre damage percent or 1 Spectre damage percent and 1 attack percent. The damage difference between the two is essentially negligible. Just pick whatever configuration has the best rolls. Damage does fall off if you use double the attack percent or double 4-cost instead of double 3-cost. I do not recommend such configurations unless you have absolutely abhorrent substat rolls in your 3-cost Echoes. For the 1-cost Echoes, you want attack percent as that's what Jinhsi scales from. That covers the main stat configuration for Jinhsi. Now let's move on to the substats. For substats, you want to look for crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, and energy regen for the most part. Resonance skill and resonance liberation damage are useful but not particularly impactful. Speaking of energy regen, Jinhsi wants to cast her liberation every rotation, as doing it once every 2 rotations is a damage loss, which is not offset by foregoing energy regen stats. Essentially, the damage you lose by not using your liberation every rotation or off cooldown is greater than the damage you gain by not going for energy substats. As for how many substats you want, somewhere around 4 energy substats should suffice. This means that for substats, you'd want to look for crit rate, crit damage, and energy as a baseline on most of your pieces to gear Jinhsi properly. Anything additional is nice to have. That covers the Echoes for Jinhsi. Now let's move on to weapons. Jinhsi's signature weapon is a whole 50% better than the craftable broadblade. It gets better the more skill damage you do, which means the difference is even bigger if you're getting high incandescent stacks like 35 or 40 per rotation. As for my calcs, I'm assuming an average of 25 stacks, which I feel is more realistic for most teams. But we'll talk more about that shortly in the team section. Her signature overall, if you do not have Jiyan signature, is 100% worth it, and I very highly recommend getting it. She's not unplayable without it, but it helps her feel as good as she should. Jiyan's signature passive with heavy damage bonus is pretty much useless for Jinhsi, but the other stats work and ends up being not that much worse than her signature. If you have Jiyan's signature, use that and save your pulse. The 5-star standard banner broadblade is alright to use if you already have it, but it is not good enough for me to recommend using the selector to get it. Same with the Battle Pass weapon. It's a decent option, but you may still have better options to choose instead. And lastly, the craftable broadblade gives her a bunch of energy regen, so you can essentially ignore AR substats in her echoes and aim for attack percent in its place. But again, I feel like her damage without her signature or Jiyan signature might end up feeling underwhelming. I can't say I necessarily like this direction that Kuro is taking by making weapons feel too strong, but it is how it is. I'll quickly talk about which talent to focus on. Jinhsi's Forte circuit is by far the most important part of her kit in terms of damage, so max this out first. Then focus on the resonance liberation followed by the resonance skill. The intro skill and basic attacks can be leveled up leisurely if you so choose, but they are not a significant portion of her damage. And that covers the build aspect. Let's move on to Jinhsi Teams now. Before I start talking about Jinhsi Teams, I think it's important for me to reiterate something I mentioned in my kit analysis video, and that is the fact that Jinhsi is incredibly flexible. I honestly do not think her design could be any better. As such, I know you'll be tempted to wonder what Jinhsi's best team is, but in my opinion there isn't one. She slots in well with a variety of characters and performs her job extremely good. It's not a jiyan or calcharo situation where they really favor a particular sub-DPS or buffer. At least, not yet. New characters in the future may change things, but as it stands, Jinhsi's range of teams is vast and they all should perform fairly close to each other in practical gameplay. You may see 5% more DPS in one team versus some other team in sheets, but in my experience with in-game testing, it doesn't always translate that noticeably. Most teams perform rather similarly to one another despite what surface level look at them may make you think, but enough of that. I broadly categorize Jinhsi teams into two types, hypercarry and dual DPS. Hypercarry teams aim to maximize Jinhsi's damage either through supportive abilities or by maximizing the possible incandescent stacks gain. So this means units like Yinlin, Murtafi, or Yanwu who deal coordinated attacks, improving her stack gen, sometimes leading to 35 or 40 stacks, or units like jianxin or Thaw improving Jinhsi's personal damage. Hypercarry Jinhsi teams will feel pretty good with high investment on Jinhsi herself, which includes things like having the signature weapon, near-perfect echoes, or sequences on Jinhsi. This is not to say that a single copy of Jinhsi cannot be played in such a team, just that this type of team will scale better with investment. So, what are your options? The unit I believe will feel the best to play here is Yinlin. She has snappy rotations and can consolidate a little bit of AoE damage while buffing Jinhsi's liberation and providing a lot of stacks through her coordinated attacks. Yanwu can play a similar role to Yinlin if you do not have her, and may work especially well against bosses. Jianxin is also a character I think will pair extremely well with Jinhsi, as Jinhsi has nuking capability, and Jianxin can group a bunch of enemies in a way for Jinhsi to instantly delete, giving you a lot more leeway with the rest of your rotation. Thaw is also a viable buffer, but I think she falls a bit short because of the utilities that the other characters can provide, and the fact that her energy gen isn't really the best, but she can work if you really want to use her. I do not recommend replacing Verina for Thaw, as Verina remains incredibly strong as a buffer. All the second slot units in hypercarry teams should ideally be using the Moonlit Cloud set to buff Jinhsi even further. It is 100% worth it over sets that give them personal damage. Generally, Jinhsi's gain in damage with Moonlit Clouds will outperform the slight increase in damage that supports with elemental sets will gain, and that's not even counting the fact that the Huron Echo will give a lot of energy to your team, so just use Moonlit Clouds. Moving on to dual DPS setups. If you've watched my videos before, you'd know that I'm personally a big fan of such teams. I think this game provides plenty of opportunities for two damage dealers to work together, supported by team-wide buffs of Verina and the healing set. It enables burst rotations where you have to examine the situation and figure out which character's on-field attacks will kill the fastest. Got a wave of small enemies? Jinhsi's liberation will likely nuke them out of existence. An elite comes up next. You can probably switch to someone like Encore to do her burst rotation in a short window and deal a huge chunk of damage, and probably also stance break the elite to allow Jinhsi to cast a charged up Epiphany skill and finish it off. I personally love such synergies of burst windows. So, how are dual DPS teams for Jinhsi? Pretty good, actually. They can compete with hypercarry Jinhsi. They naturally require investment into both DPS as opposed to investment in just Jinhsi herself, but the payoff is generally a bit more flexibility with tight matchups and more freedom to quick swap, as you don't have to worry about buffs that go away after you swap, enabling more iframes and multiple attacks to go through at once, increasing your damage substantially. So, who to pair with her? I think Encore fits the bill quite well. A couple of her attacks can be swap cancelled, allowing you to do multiple attacks at once, and her personal damage can rival Jinhsi's own. I think Encore and Jinhsi make a fairly good pairing. In a similar vein, changli would work very well and have similar performance to Encore. While changli has lower personal damage compared to Encore, changli can buff Jinhsi's liberation to kind of close the gap between the two. I know a lot of people are fans of Havoc Rover, and she works extremely well with Jinhsi too, given her burst DPS playstyle. Jinhsi has plenty of great options regardless of what type of team you choose to run. And that covers the team section as well. Be on the lookout for Jinhsi's post-release video after a week or so when she's out. And if you have any questions regarding Jinhsi meanwhile, let me know in the comments below. Consider subscribing if you enjoy this video, and until next time.